Welcome to the 27th video in the Just In Case series. My name is Mayan Chung Judge, and I am the director and owner of Quality Equality, which is an OD UK consultancy firm based in Oxford. We call it Just In Case in this time of pandemic when you are tired and you want to learn but you can't go anywhere. This series is to help you to refresh your memory on something, learn something new, and just to be evoked and provoked into some fresh insights that would enable you to have better practice. Today, I don't need to introduce Penny Lawrence. She and Penelope Brooks, the ex-CEO of Atlantic Institute, did the first video. Penny was the ex-deputy chief exec of Oxfam GB, and now a brilliant independent consultant, an applied researcher, and an executive coach. Penny is very concerned because of her experience of dealing with crisis after crisis, that when you actually have protracted crisis, what else as a leader you could do. So today she is really talking about her insights for leadership and organization, and in terms of how to deal with protracted crisis. As Oxfam GB's program director, she was the strategic and operation lead of Oxfam program in 60 countries. And she has led so many collaborative projects across the issues like women's rights, equitable supply chain and humanitarian response, and of course, international crisis. So Penny, thank you so much for your time and your investment. And I am so sure those of you who are watching Penny will learn so much from her. So Penny, over to you.
Thanks so much, Mayan. I'm deeply honoured to be invited to share my learning on this platform, and thank you for your generosity and kindness. I'm Penny Lawrence, and I have spent my career in international development and humanitarian crisis leadership. I was Oxfam GB's Programmes Director and Deputy Chief Exec for over a decade. So I led internal crises, I was trained in crisis management and crisis leadership, and lots of different humanitarian responses, from earthquakes through to conflicts. I learned a huge amount from the communities we worked with, from peers, from partners, and collaborators, and I offer this learning with huge gratitude to them. For the last couple of years, I've been coaching other leaders, and when COVID-19 hit the UK in March earlier this year, I, like many, pivoted to help leaders respond to the crisis, and I've again learned a huge amount from my coachees. And in general, I've learned a lot from my learning. Particularly, I think McKinsey have done a very good job at putting out lots through their insights and podcasts, lots of very helpful practical tips, and I would warmly recommend them to you. So I offer my learning now, and you might be asking, this is a bit of a strange time. Why wasn't this offered in March? I think there's something very tricky about crisis leadership when it's a protracted, ongoing crisis. When does a crisis end and then normal resumes? And of course, in this crisis, it's an ongoing change. So it's particularly tricky, I think, to lead through that. And I hope what I offer is useful to the current context, and the current context being it's been an incredibly tough 7-8 months for leaders, as everyone has focused all their energies on pivoting and adapting and scaling up and responding. And each organisation has been very different. They've been affected very differently. Some have had to stop a lot of what they're doing. Some have found a renewed sense of purpose from adapting and changing. And some have had to speed up things and make very difficult decisions and very rapid decisions. All the leaders I speak to are exhausted. And some have managed to take a break over the holiday season, and some haven't at all. Many are in the middle of letting go of staff. That's a particularly tough time. Either decisions have been made and yet to be implemented, or they're in the middle of the decision-making process. And many are asking, how on earth do I maintain my energy to face this winter of more COVID response, let alone the organisation's energy? So in leading humanitarian crises, we really learnt about the importance of signalling the different phases of a crisis. Readjusting and naming the crisis is helpful, but what's really important is telling people what this means you now want them to do. And in an earthquake like in Haiti, or a flood like in Pakistan, it's very easy. You have an event and then you have a response. You build back better afterwards. But I suppose in conflict responses like Syria or like Yemen or like in Congo, you never know when that conflict is going to end. And that's much more akin, I think, to responding to the COVID crisis now. So in the early stages, in the first days really of any kind of crisis, you're in that kind of scale up mode. You're going to be looking at threats and opportunities and risks. And I think it's really important to think of the crisis through three lenses or three perspectives. I can't hold any more than three, but thinking of it certainly from your clients or customers' point of view, thinking about it from your staff's point of view, and thinking about it from the wider system point of view, the organisation or the sector that you're in. So for clients and customers, it's how have your clients' needs changed and what can you do immediately? For staff, it's about, do you know what the priorities are? Can I tell you what you need to do today? How are you looking after staff well-being? And regular communication. And for the organisation, it may well be about survival. Can you shift funds from X to Y? Can you make sure that you can turn on the tap on some things and turn off the tap on others? And exploring with your governance structure how you can really respond. So it's very fast, it's very furious, speedy decision making, it's frequent communication, it's very high energy and it's very all-consuming. Regularizing a response in some way requires you to signal that you're moving into the next phase. So that the next phase, over the coming weeks or coming months, you need to keep listening to your clients. Clients' needs change over time and you need to keep adapting as well as meeting their immediate needs. How do you connect them with the wider system or with your other organisational needs and so on? For staff, what for each individual do they carry on doing? How do they need to adapt it if they're working from home, for example? What actually from what they were doing before just needs to stop, it's no longer relevant, and what new things would you like them to adjust to and how will they respond to that? So supporting staff working from home, all the digital stuff was what a lot of people focused on. And I think where we are now in these coming weeks is recognising that people working from home, when they're looking after their kids and their pets and they're staring at the screen for long times, there's lots of health and safety issues that employers need to take into account. Have they got decent chairs at home? Would you set up rules around screen time? Some people have said, there's Wednesday, nobody is staring at a screen. You can only do reading. Other people have said an hour off, no emails to be sent. Lots of different ways of adapting to allow people to be a bit more resilient. But as a leader, I think leaders are also sort of, that's the time really where the clarity of the emergency offers new insights into your identity or your vision that really begins to emerge. What is most relevant? What have you adapted that actually may be highly relevant for the organisational future to thrive, not just survive at the moment? And I think that's a real role for the leader, is to be able to spot that and capture that learning. And then over the longer term, regularizing the response, if you like. Again, you need to continue to look at threats, opportunities and risks. But from a client's point of view, it's interesting how crises change the relationship with clients and customers. Maybe more trust has been developed. Maybe actually more services have been developed. What's needed now to sustain that relationship? What changes maybe have happened within the system that actually, or within the organisation, that actually you need to respond to? digital ways of obviously connecting with clients has changed hugely for a lot of organisations. And that's quite sort of challenging in some ways, but it's also changed and shifted the relationship, and sort of picking that up and being curious about that, I think a lot of people have been reflecting on. And then what lessons have we learned? What changes have been made that you might want to keep? What changes have you made that you might need to stop for staff? And then on the organisational front, that's where you really begin to pick up that sort of new identity. But really, you need the processes to help you do that. So if you're still thinking, actually, that 5-year strategy we developed is the right thing, well, have a look at it. It may have elements of it that are really still relevant. But most people have shifted into planning cycles that are much shorter than sort of 3 to 5 year strategies. McKinsey had written a lot about how to shift to agile. NZ International, the same thing, really good stuff. But it's about shorter planning cycles. It's about being confident to test, learn, capture the learning, and then adapt. And those faster planning iterations, where maybe it's 3 to 6 months or 6 to 12 months, seem more realistic to leaders at the moment than the longer term strategizing. So in order to respond to these different phases of a crisis, leaders' content and approach also needs to change and shift, still being the authentic you. But the next slide really is trying to identify what it is that you might need to say or do, and perhaps what seems to work in terms of the how and the approach. So in those initial stages, when everybody's confused and anxious and uncertain, then you'll have already gone into sort of telling the facts as they are, the honesty. Yeah, I don't know how we're going to respond, but we're going to get through it together. You'll have helped focus on priorities today and focused on the well-being of staff and clients. And that kind of calmness and empathy and the use of language like we rather than I, being trustworthy, compassionate and steering rather than controlling, as well as looking after yourself in that first phase is really important. I think some of the leaders that did particularly well were people like the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, who said, be strong and be kind. You can do the two things together. And I think those leaders have been most successful. In the next stage, where people are feeling very worn down, very frustrated by being locked at home and with limited social life, and the kids are still at home, etc. People really have needed, I think, positive stories and that sense of being connected. Again, regular communications, but clarity perhaps on not what the priorities are today, but the priorities over the coming weeks, giving back some sort of sense of agency to people, but also helping and guiding and supporting people in what remains relevant, what adaptations need to be made, what needs to stop doing, what you need to do in the future, and what you're doing now you're doing really well. Those sorts of things I think are really important. The approach then is much more one of listening and recognizing that each individual's different journey needs an individualized response. So some people have really felt angry and distressed and acknowledging the pain of that. Others have more thrived on high energy and maybe just need calming down a little. But there's a real sort of sense of autonomy that's needed for people to sort of regain that sense of control over their own lives and their own work. But they still need a sense of belonging to the crisis. And holding those two things in tension, I think, has really been very important for leaders. Enabling people to collaborate has been the other thing that's been really tricky, I think, but is again really important that you don't allow everything to happen bilaterally, but enabling collaboration. Some of the collaboration tools digitally have been invaluable, although a lot of people have complained, of course, it's not the same as co-creating when you're physically present. But enabling people to develop their own individual resilience, what actually works for them in terms of work patterns and so on, has really helped, I think, people gain that sense of agency and that sense of purpose and to carry on. For leaders, I think they are the holder of that process, but they're also listening to what is emerging from that, and that renewed sense of purpose is being sort of captured and played back into to staff and into the next phase that you want to go to. So this next phase, this next normal, or regularizing a response, where people are still uncertain, and a lot of people are really ready for a change and ready for it to be normal in some way. Other people still suffering that sense of loss. That's where it's really important for that new identity, that new vision for the future to emerge from the learning. You're still looking after staff, but actually we've learned this, and actually we could be this sort of organisation. A lot of people have learned so much about going online or digital. Some companies have completely shifted from making one product to shifting to making PPE. They get back to making the car engines they were making before. All those kinds of decisions, actually communicating that new vision that you want for the company or for the organisation is really energising for people. But also reassuring people that, of course, we're going to continue to have COVID spikes, and we now have the manual, the guidance of what happens. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, this is what you need to do. Here's how you contact your line manager if something happens for you, and all those kind of guidance that you've developed. People need reassuring that that is still there. So in the regularizing a response, it's really signalling that is really important. We are now moving from the emergency, the scale-up phase, to this next phase. Naming it is really helpful if you can do that, calling it something. But what's most important is signalling the expectations you have for staff and the implications of it. This is what starts, stops, continues. It won't be all-consuming. It's our next normal, and this is how we respond to the spike should we need to. And exploring with yourself and with your staff in how to do that in a resilient way, how to do that with more constant energy. What do you need to do to maintain your fuel tanks, as Mayanne would say, maintain the fuel in your fuel tanks? It's less intense phase, but you need to maintain your focus, and everybody is very different. I hope that that's been useful and seems relevant to your leadership journey. And I'd just like to finish with a focus on yourself as a leader. You are really important as you guide your organisation through this, and you need to look after yourself. Not only do you need to do that for the organisation, but you need to do that to give permission to everybody else to look after themselves too. If you don't look after yourself, then you role model. Actually, you've got to work all hours, and you can't take a break, and you've got to be perfect. That doesn't help anybody else. So that's the first thing. Look after yourself, because you're important, and it gives permission to others to look after themselves too. And the second is, there is no perfect way of leading a crisis. Don't expect to do it perfectly. And the more confident you are in showing your vulnerabilities, often the better leader you'll be. If you can show your vulnerabilities, you can ask for help. That allows other people in. If you can show your vulnerabilities, it allows others to show their vulnerabilities. It allows for an honesty and increases a trustworthiness that you have as a leader as well. But it feels more real to people. And again, I think the best leaders that we have all seen role models of in this crisis have had that ability to do that. So all strength to you, but take care of yourselves as leaders as well. And thank you very much for listening.
On behalf of everyone, may I thank Penny for your helpful explanation of how best to navigate through this protracted crisis time. And what's sitting with me is just how important it is about taking care of yourself as a leader. With the reminder of how you care for yourself will give other people permission to care for themselves. Thank you for sharing such personal and valuable wisdom with us. And I hope that those of you who've been watching this video would like to keep in touch with Penny. Her contact information and other resources are at the end of this video. So may I, on behalf of everybody, say thank you to you again. And maybe next time when we meet on video again, or next time when you watch this the second time, the protracted crisis may slowly disappear. Keep well, keep safe.